The David Bohm Society presents.
Well, we were discussing yesterday about many things, and including the role of assumptions. That the assumption is the point at which thought begins to act on its own, to take on power. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Right. And it goes on to become a disposition or an attitude, and which affects not only all our actions and emotions, but also the further thoughts. It comes back into thought again. And thought beginning with the proposal or the proposition, then the supposition, the assumption at which it starts to take power. Now, one of the ways in which it does this is to affect the emotion. It creates an emotional disposition. A certain assumption that you're being badly treated will create a disposition to respond with anger or fear. And but we have, the trouble is that it's hard to see the connection of those two, right? Probably, maybe the very structure makes it hard. I don't know. As far as I'm aware, see, the new brain is connected to the old brain by a rather thick bundle of nerves. So whatever happens in one quickly affects the other. But I don't know that we have any natural way of being aware of what's passing along those nerves, you see. Like we have proprioception, we said, of the body. We know that when we move the body, we have moved it. It didn't move by itself. But somehow, when we make an assumption, the emotions move, but we don't quite see that we may have moved them. Right? Rather, we say they have moved, you see. I have been moved by something deep, right? Which sometimes may happen too. And therefore, it's the wrong picture. You see, you only see half the picture, which is the emotions. The other half is out, so if you see half the picture, the meaning may be wrong. Or on the other hand, you see the assumptions and then don't see the emotions which they are producing or which have been produced by such assumptions. And therefore, the picture is also wrong. So the old brain, therefore, never comes into harmony with the new brain, right? But the old brain makes demands on the new brain to produce assumptions which will be more pleasing and more secure looking, although false. Therefore, you have self-deception, right? And also the new brain tries somehow to get emotions that are less disturbing, because these emotions, these very powerful emotions, prevent it from working right. So therefore, it tries to impose emotional states, control the emotions, which again is just a conflict. Right? It can't really do that. It can only superpose on top of the emotions you have another set which are in conflict. Right? And therefore you have a conflict of emotions, you have a contradiction of the assumptions. Because the emotions are demanding assumptions which are false. And also, but the brain also is trying to hold to assumptions that they're correct. And so, therefore, what appears as contradiction on the side of the intellect or the assumptions is conflict on the side of the emotions. Two different attempts to do two different things at the same time, which don't agree. Then we said that probably there's no way, neither side can deal with that, right? See, the intellect or the new brain cannot handle this, because everything it does depends on the old brain. I mean, its very desire to do anything depends on what the old brain feels is worth doing, right? It wants to do. But on the other hand, the new brain is in the environment of the old brain. All its information is coming, the other way around. The old brain is in the environment of the new brain. And all its information is coming from the new brain, so it's filtered through the new brain anyway, so that it can't really take an independent action. Right? If you depend on somebody for all your information, you can't be independent of that person. And he can feed you any information he may, which may be false, right? So that's the problem, you see, saying that that's a kind of it was probably almost inevitable that humanity would fall into this problem once the brain structure developed so fast with the new brain. And at the same time, we're asking, can we rise out above that, you see, beyond that? I mean, you can say it's a challenge, or you can say, is it possibly the destiny of humanity to do that and really to change radically its whole being, right? Because if these two brains came together, we would be very different sorts of people, a very different culture, a very different society. It would be a tremendous revolution. You see, because all this deception going on, self-deception, and confusion and conflict and so on, would then no longer be necessary. Yes, well, that is one point, then, what we were discussing yesterday. And you see, we don't see that the assumptions are affecting our observation. You see, they affect the way we see things we were discussing, with the way we experience them and what we want to do and so on. So in a way, we're looking through our assumptions, you see. The assumptions could be said to be an observer in the sense that, you see, the meaning of the word observe, probably you could get it from there's a Latin way of defining observation as gathering with the eye, or listening as gathering with the ear, right? That is, everything in this room is gathered together. It comes through the pupil of the eye into the retina, into the brain, you see. And or it may come through the ear, right? So the observer is what gathers, it selects and gathers the relevant information and organizes it, right, into some meaning and picture. So that's what's done by the assumptions in thought, right? According to what you assume, you will select and gather certain information as important and put it together in a certain way, right? In a certain structure. That's clear. So, therefore, the assumptions are functioning as a kind of observer, right? Right? But then when we observe, we forget that, and we say we're looking, without taking that into account, right? But this observer also is profoundly affects the observed, right? And is affected by the observed, right? There's really very little separation between them, right? If you say the emotions are the observed, then the assumptions are profoundly affected by the emotions, and the assumptions profoundly affect the emotions. On the other hand, if you say the emotions are the observer, they're determining the way it's organized, then the assumptions will be the observer. You may like them or dislike them, you see. But then again, it works the same way, right? That the observed is profoundly affected by the observer by the observed, right? They really are one cycle, one process. The separation between them is not very significant. You see, on the other hand, if I observe this object or the chair, what's going on in me is not very much affected by the chair. What's going on in the chair is not profoundly affected by me, you see. So we could say in that case the observer is significantly different from the observed, right? But in the case of looking at your emotions or looking at your thoughts, that cannot be the case. Or in looking at society, or for example, looking at somebody else, right? Because the way you see depends on your assumptions, and you will get an emotional reaction from that person which enters you and affects the way you see, right? So therefore, at a certain stage, the distinction of the observer and the observed cannot be maintained, or I think as Krishnamurti used to say, the observer is the observed, or right? Whereas in another situation, the distinction can be maintained, right, in a reasonable way. Now, but you see, if you don't put the two together, the observer and the observed, see, first of all, if you don't put the assumptions together with the emotions, or whatever belongs in this picture has to be all there, or else the whole thing will be wrong. So you say, if we are saying, I'm going to look into my mind, but I don't notice that I'm but I don't consider my assumptions, then the picture is wrong because the assumptions are looking, right? So that's a common problem of introspection. You say, I'm going to look at myself inwardly, but the assumptions are not looked at, right? The assumptions are looking. If you say that, after all, the eye doesn't look at itself, you say, so the eye just gathers information about everything else. With a mirror, it might look at itself. But unless you can, so either you say we need a mirror for the assumptions, or you could say some other process takes place which can see it all together. Perhaps both of these approaches could be explored, you see. Because in relationship with people, you do get a mirror of your assumptions, right? Right? But then something deeper is needed as well, right? Which is somehow an awareness which is not restricted, say, to the old brain or the new brain, or to anything else in particular, to an attention which would be able to go into all those areas.
dbohm.com